So it's going to be close to 50 days since the war between Israel and Hamas began. This week, there was the announcement of a ceasefire for 4 days in exchange for 50 hostages due to be released. That agreement was due to take effect starting this morning, Thursday morning, but now there's been a delay of 24 hours. Let's find out about this particular agreement and where this war is headed. Eylon Levy is the Israel government spokesperson. He's the spokesperson for the current wartime cabinet headed by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Thank you very much, Mr. Levy, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. This ceasefire deal for 4 days in exchange for 50 Israeli hostages, many of them women and children, to be released, it was supposed to have come into effect starting today, Thursday morning, but it's been delayed by a day. It's been delayed, pushed back by another 24 hours. Do you know what is the exact reason and what is causing this delay?
It's been nearly 50 days now that Hamas has been holding 240 innocent people hostage. Hamas can release them any moment it wants. It could have released them yesterday, the day before. It could have released them on October 7th or never taken them hostage. And every additional moment, every additional minute that Hamas doesn't let those poor, vulnerable children go is another moment that it continues to psychologically terrorize those children's families who know nothing about the condition of the hostages. They don't know what physical condition they're in. They don't know about their emotional or psychological condition. And it's another moment they terrorize the people they are holding hostage. They don't know what has happened to their families, the families who were massacred on October 7th. And we're going to continue putting military pressure on Hamas to release all of our hostages, because that is the only thing that the evil terrorists who perpetrated the October 7th massacre will respond to.
Mr. Levy, how worried are you that this period of 4 days, this pause of 4 days, could be potentially used by Hamas to try and extract more, whether it is from Israel or the team of negotiators that it is dealing with, that it's negotiating with, that they're going to use this as some kind of a bargaining chip to extract more, possibly even position themselves in a better position than they have been in these last close to 50 days. How worried are you about that?
We would prefer to continue putting unrelenting military pressure on Hamas to destroy that terror organization. But we have two goals in this war: to destroy Hamas so it can never do another October 7th massacre, and to bring back our hostages. And our assessment is that a very brief pause in order to get as many hostages out as possible is a price that we are willing to pay. And I'll add, a brief pause will also allow the IDF to prepare for the days ahead. They've been involved in some intense fighting, and if Hamas respects that brief pause, our troops will also be in a better position to continue the fight against Hamas and to continue the fight against the terror group that perpetrated that inhumane massacre on October 7th.
Now, over the last couple of weeks or so, much of the focus of this war, both on the battleground and, of course, on the airwaves, has been on the Al-Shifa hospital. Hamas claims it's the biggest hospital in Gaza. Israel claims that underneath the hospital is the headquarters of Hamas. There is at least that's the allegation from Israel, a wide tunnel network, arms and weaponry that's been stored there. And now the IDF has put out a video after they managed to capture the Al-Shifa, which shows the tunnel. But there are people who are still saying that what Israel was accusing Hamas of doing under the premises, under the compound of Al-Shifa, has still not added up. What would you like to say to those people?
We think that the UN agencies that have not condemned Hamas's atrocities on October 7th, that have not demanded a return of the hostages, that have said nothing about the Israeli women and girls who were raped on October 7th, they should all be ashamed. We think that the UN agencies in the Gaza Strip that knew that Hamas was using the Shifa hospital as a terror headquarters, that knew that it had tunnels under the hospital and said nothing, should be ashamed. We're demanding global accountability from these institutions. We think they look very silly now. We're asking, what did you know? Why did you not say anything? And now that the evidence is out in the air of how you were complicit with Hamas's illegal abuse of hospitals as human shields, what do you plan to do to make sure that a Hamas's abuse of humanitarian law never happen again? We hold Hamas completely responsible for all the suffering in the Gaza Strip, which is really heartbreaking. as a result of its decision to declare war on us with the October 7th massacre, and we hold the UN agencies that have been covering up for it completely complicit with Hamas's crimes against humanity.
Now, again, through the last couple of weeks, it's not just the Israeli children that the world has been completely appalled by. The pictures of these little toddlers who've been affected, whether it's the ones who've been taken hostage or the ones whose family members have been taken hostage. But the world community has also been waking up to images of little kids in Gaza who've been killed because of airstrikes and ground operations. What would you say to those who say that Israel and Hamas are not quite comparable because Israel, as a responsible member of the Committee of Nations, has to live up to an entirely different standard, will be held to a higher standard than a terrorist organization like Hamas? What would you say to that argument?
And that's really amazing. Think about how many international media outlets, how many international officials were so invested in denying that Hamas had a terror infrastructure underneath the hospital. Israel told the whole world, they made it out as if we were liars, and now the evidence is there for everyone to see. And they look very, very silly. Hamas had a vast terror complex underneath that hospital. The evidence is there for everyone to see. We've started taking reporters in. I hope international reporters can go in too. And we demand accountability from those institutions, and we will continue to expose the evidence of Hamas's abuse of those hospitals. We're talking about a very large complex. I think some people thought Israel was going to pull back a curtain on day one and say, tada. It takes time. These areas are booby-trapped. It's dangerous. But we will expose the whole Shifa terror complex under that hospital, and we will demand answers from the UN officials who have been covering up for Hamas.
Now, last night I got the chance to speak to some of the families of the hostages, and the sentiment amongst them seems to be that they want the Israel government to act and act now. They're saying it's been close to 50 days, and that is far too long for them to live in this kind of, limbo, really, not knowing what is the state of their relatives who've been kidnapped, who've been held as hostage. There is a great deal of apprehension amongst those families. They want your government, the government under Prime Minister Netanyahu, to take this deal and to execute this deal as quickly as possible. And now there's a delay of 24 hours. What would you say to those families at this time?
Hamas has been torturing the families of these poor hostages by holding these hostages without access to the Red Cross, without any communication with the outside world, deliberately, psychologically torturing these people. In Israel, the hostage crisis is an intensely personal issue. There are 240 hostages. We're a small country of only 10 million people. Everyone in Israel knows someone who had someone stolen from them. I found out only this morning that a friend of mine had his brother-in-law stolen on October 7th. We know these children's faces. We know their names. They are household names and household faces. And if you wake us up in the middle of the night because no one here has been sleeping for the last 50 days, we can tell you their stories. This is intensely personal for us. We're doing everything we can to bring them all home, and we're committed to that. The men and the women, the children and the elderly, the civilians and the soldiers, and we're committed to that pledge. There will be no one left behind.
And so what happens finally after this 4-day pause, and presumably it'll start from Friday, but after next Tuesday, what happens? The Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has said that the war will continue with a greater intensity after this 4-day period. Just paint the picture for us. What does next week and the week after that and the next month look like? How and when, and this is the question that everyone around the world is asking, how and when does this end?
After the initial 4-day pause, Hamas will face a choice. For every additional day of pause that it wants, it can release 10 hostages. And we will, of course, want to receive additional hostages and give them that pause. But after we are done, we will continue putting pressure on Hamas. And this war will end with the end of Hamas. Because on October 7th, Hamas burned, beheaded, and abducted people. And then when it went into the Gaza Strip, it told us that it wants to do it all over again. And we will end this war by ending Hamas, or else it will do it again and it will be emboldened. This war will end with no more Hamas. We're fighting for humanity. We're fighting for the right of little Israeli girls not to be raped by masked terrorists with Kalashnikov rifles. And if anyone thinks we're going to stop fighting for that right, if anyone thinks we're going to stop before we are assured of our people's safety, then they don't understand how much we care for our people. They don't understand how much we care for our children and what we will do for them.
All right, Mr. Eylon Levy, Israeli government spokesperson, many thanks for joining us here on CNN News 18.
Thank you.